Good day, you good people. Thanks for joining me for this video. Of course, this is the third recording that we've done on classification of skill. Okay, so classification of skill. If you haven't looked at the recordings on the muscular involvement continuum and the environmental continuum, I would recommend you do that because I'm going to be talking about aspects of those within this recording. So, try and get these in the right order, study these in the right order. But let's get on with that, all that being said, and let's now think about the idea of classifying skills by the pacing of them. And pacing doesn't mean how fast you go, how fast you leg it down a track. It means who initiates the start of the movement. So we've got two scenarios here, really, and then there's everything in between. The first scenario is what we describe as a self-paced skill. And of course, I talked about this in the environmental continuum, if you remember. And we've also got what we would refer to as an externally paced skill. An externally paced skill, and there are many sort of variations of this in between also. Okay, so we're going to look at the extreme ends, but don't forget that a lot of sport performances would sit somewhere in the middle. In fact, almost all, in fact. So let's think about this notion of being self-paced, having a self-paced skill. Well, by far the most important part of this, and really could be defined as the definition of a self-paced skill, is that we would say the performer, Jess Ennis in this case, doing her long jump, Jess controls the start of the movement. Okay, controls the start of the movement. So what we mean by that is that the moment to run down the runway and then to plant one's foot onto the board and leap into the air is all sort of initiated by the performer themselves. They decide when, they decide the moment. I said this in the last video. With the high jump example, you'll often see and hear them, slow clapping, psyching themselves up, getting that rhythm, going, ready, now I go. And the key bit is now I go. Okay, so it's about me. It's about, in this case, Jess deciding for herself when the performance starts. And we'd also say, and this is kind of our second part of our definition, very similar sort of point, is that the performer controls the speed of movement. The performer controls speed of movement. So, in the long jump example, the speed of movement is often as fast as you can, right? Or at least with a bit of control. But of course, there are occasions in sport where we control our movement and we control the rate at not just top speed, but in this example it happens to be a very explosive example. We'd also say that a self-paced skill, as we've seen previously, is what we'd call a closed skill, an habitual skill, a pre-learned skill, a skill with a stable, consistent, unchanging environment. And we see that in this environment of the long jump, don't we? So what does that then mean for our externally paced skill? Obviously, we're going to get a lot of the opposite of this, of what we just said with self-paced, but let's make sure we get our language correct. So I like this statement. See if you can learn this statement very carefully, very accurately, and very deliberately. We would say the performer still starts the movement, so the performer starts based on action of others. Now think about that. Performer starts based on action of others. So let's take an example from this image. Let's take for example this performer here, okay, this defender here. Of course, he's defending this player here. If this player here either moves towards the ball or spins and comes in here under the post, then what we've got a situation here is that this person obviously has to respond to that based on the action of the offensive player, based on the action of this player in the white vest. Okay, so we can see already that this is an externally paced skill. They're going to be in the position they are until that person shifts and moves and finds a different location, and then they're going to, of course, have to initiate a movement in response to that. So we see it's based on the actions of others. So we'd repeat a couple of things we said about our open skills. We have externally paced skills in a changing environment. So first of all, we can see that there is overlap between an externally paced skill and what we've got here. Look, a changing, unstable, adjusting environment. We've got the same sort of considerations, right? We've got the same sort of considerations. A changing environment means an externally paced skill. So because of that, we'll quickly add in that these tend to be open skills. So externally paced skills are always open skills. All right, and the only other point I want to make is that the skill involves adjustment, and because it involves adjustment, again, we could go on about perception, decision making, awareness. It's this psychomotor skill we talked about in our very first lessons, right? The whole package. Whereas this is more like that motor skill, the power, the strength, that gross involvement in that sort of pushing off hard. Very few decisions being made here. Many decisions being made by this defender here. That is all from me. Thanks for listening.